Hello and welcome to Sectors Up Close. I'm Thomas Warner. Today we're going to be revisiting Brazilian equities, and my guest is Stephen Schoenfeld. He is Chief Executive at MarketVector Indexes. The Brazilian economy surprised to the upside in the second quarter, growing 1.4%. But that performance did little to please foreign investors, who have seen the MSCI Brazil Index slide 16% in US dollar terms so far this year. Almost all of that slide is down to the Brazilian real. It's one of this year's worst performing emerging markets currencies over worries on fiscal deficits and monetary policy. Investor attention this week, though, is on the country's central bank. It's almost certain to hike rates by a quarter point to 10.75% amid stubbornly high inflation. Well, I'm joined now by MarketVector's Stephen Schoenfeld. A very warm welcome to you, Stephen. Let's start with the central bank. Rates obviously moving up rather than down, in contrast to most other major economies. But in the new year, Brazil will have a new central bank governor, and he is rumoured to be more dovish and is supposedly more of an ally of President Lula as well. The danger there, of course, is that he could stoke inflation and bring the real even lower. So does this new governor present a potentially lose-lose scenario for foreign investors?
So we should start by acknowledging that Galopoli is a technocrat. He comes from the world of central banks. He is not an inexperienced person, but he is perceived to be more of an ally of Lula. He was a spokesman for Lula during the campaign, and Lula has politicized the central bank to some extent. So on the margin, the markets and analysts and myself, we all expect him to be a little bit more pliable, flexible with regard to interest rates. But as you mentioned, this coming week's interest rate increases is already baked in. If Brazilian inflation continues to slow, and there has been positive signs, including the August numbers, he will have a little bit of room for it. And so I wouldn't say I'm relaxed, but I'm cautious. I think I'd use that word because a lot of other fundamentals in Brazil are going well.
Well, let's look at those fundamentals now. Where on that spectrum between relaxed and cautious would you say you are at the moment for the wider economy?
So the Brazilian economy, it's not displaying any of the growth statistics that it had during the boom years of the 2000s, even part of the 2010s, but it is growing, and it's been marginally improving slightly. You've also had some really strong sectors, particularly the export sectors, which have benefited from the weaker real. And you still have a very dynamic domestic economy that produces. And I think this combination with the potential of interest rate cuts gives me hope. I'd call it a hope for some green shoots into the second half of the year. How that translates to foreign investors will be very dependent on what the Brazilian currency does, though.
So it sounds like we are hearing some quite optimistic signals from you, albeit you've tempered them with caveats there. But investors really have been voting with their feet, haven't they? AUMs for the biggest Brazil ETF, the iShares MSCI Brazil, down at a 5-year low. I mean, I suppose the potential upside of this is that valuations are very low and it does present opportunities.
Yeah, so both the mainstream large cap and small cap Brazil ETFs, when looked at in dollars or pounds or euros, have been amongst the worst performers in emerging markets. Emerging markets ex-China have actually been a pretty good asset class so far this year. So those with experience, and you could see my gray hairs of experience in emerging markets, know that often it's darkest before the dawn. We do see some chance of a turnaround, and one of the indicators of that is in small cap value and what we at MarketVector call domestic exposure and global exposure, where you isolate out the companies that really focus on domestic exposure and those that are very focused on exports. Believe it or not, both of those are outperforming these headline indexes by significant amounts. And you've also seen, as China has become less of a weight in emerging markets, Brazil becomes harder to ignore. So you add this all up, and you are hearing some optimism from me. There's an old maxim that Brazil has great potential and will always be the country of the future, implying that it never actually quite gets it done. But it has had great years, and I do think better years are ahead of it.
Well, Stephen, the MSCI was very heavily weighted toward those big three companies, obviously Vale, Unibanco and Petrobras as well. But we are now seeing a certain amount of disruption. We've got new holdings in there. What do you think this means for investors?
So I consider Nubank's growth as a company, but also in market cap, to be a very positive statement about the leadership of disruptive companies in the Brazilian market. Nu is a digital bank. It serves previously underserved or unserved parts of the population that didn't have a bank account. It's now introducing investment accounts. And so I believe it's very good for the Brazilian capital markets. It's also very good for the Brazilian financial sector. There are other companies like Mercado Libre and PagSeguro that are also going to be moving up in investors' perception. So it is a very positive sign.
Well, Stephen, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. That was Stephen Schoenfeld, Chief Executive at MarketVector Indexes. And that is your look at investing in Brazilian equities. I'm Thomas Warner, and this is Reuters.